Okay, so from the introduction video, we're going to focus on Docker, what it is and how it can be used. But in addition to show it in action, we're essentially going to be writing a small application in Node.js. It could be in anything. It could be in .NET Core, it could be in Ruby on Rails, it could be Python, Java, whatever what flavor of language you want to use. It's not specific. You can use Docker in lots of different environments. But in my case, I'm using Node.js because it's fairly straightforward to work with. We'll go into Node.js a little bit and explain about the application in another video. But in turn, we're using with Node.js, because we're building essentially a web API, we're going to have a small database which is going to be using MongoDB. And in our case specifically, it's MongoDB Atlas, which is essentially a cloud-hosted version of MongoDB. And again, we'll explain a little bit about what MongoDB is very top level, but essentially it's a database. But unlike rather a relational database, it's what they call a document database. And if you're familiar with JSON, if you're not, Google it, there's loads of resources out there, but it's essentially a JSON sort of format. So where you have XML as well, JSON's a lightweight sort of structured sort of set of data basically, and MongoDB uses that. But again, a lot of that we'll go into in another video. But the final thing we will do is push the because we're going to create what they call Docker containers, which is the encapsulated, predictable sort of like application environment that we're going to create. So, and again, a container is sort of a lightweight virtual machine. So where you'd normally have a virtual machine that's, say, running a server or something like that, think of it that it's, you know, rather than a server, you're running a contained application, but that application can have everything that it needs in that one container. And of course, you can run multiple containers on a server. So, you know, it's a lot more lightweight. So instead of spinning up 5, 10 virtual machines to do different things with all the weight and the configuration and things that goes with that, a container is a lot more lightweight, as you'll see. And basically, the containers are built from what they call Docker images. Okay, and an image is essentially like a template, and we'll go through that as well. So basically, we'll be pushing the container, we'll be running it locally, but we'll be also pushing it up to Azure. But it could technically go onto a, if you're in an enterprise, it could be a server within your organization running Docker, so you can run containers internally, or obviously there's lots of cloud options, Azure being one of them, AWS, Google Cloud Compute, whatever it might be. But at the moment in this video, we're going to really focus on getting running with Docker. And again, you absolutely probably should, if you want to go further and deeper into Docker, go to the website, have a look at the sort of resources and things like that, because there's lots of information about it. If you want to go into a deep dive, then you know you'll have no trouble finding what you need to. So basically, where we're going to start is if you go to docker.com and under products, you'll see Docker Desktop. I think it used to be called Docker CE Community Edition, but this is the page where you can actually download Docker, because at first what we're going to do is run it locally, test things locally, and then we'll move on to how we can push that to, you know, as we said, like Azure or whatever it might be. So you can download the flavor of Docker, which for whatever OS you've got. Ultimately, once you've done that, you'll end up with a command line option for Docker. So if I just type Docker at the command line there, you'll see that it's got a whole list of commands and the help files and all that sort of stuff. There is a when you do load Docker, certainly on Windows, I'm not sure about a Mac version, but there is something called Kitematic. okay, and Kitematic is sort of a GUI for Docker from a certain angle anyway. We'll have a look at that a little bit later, but right now I'm going to use the command line because most of the stuff that we want to do we can actually do from the command line quite straightforwardly. Okay, so now you've actually got Docker installed, hopefully. The idea is that you've got images. Okay, so Docker is when people mention containers, containers are built from an image. So you might have a base image, for instance, of a Linux base image running Node.js in my case, or .NET Core, or whatever it might be. But that image is your base template, if you like. Then you can build a container from that. So that's what it's doing. It's giving you a start point, essentially. And incidentally, once you've built a container with your application and modified things, etc., you can equally create an image from a container. So the idea being that if you've got everything configured, you've got a certain snapshot, a baseline of your application as at one point, like version 1, theoretically you can create an image from that then you could use as a base template again to build another container for, say, version 2. So there's lots of ways of working. To be honest, I don't know which way is right or wrong, but I'll just show a couple of examples that I've certainly used. But the first thing I'm going to show you is something called like Docker images. Now, I've downloaded a few images and I'll show you how to do that in a second, but basically you have these images. I've got a few here. You can see this is one that I've been working with, and I'll explain that shortly, but I've got a base image which was Linux Alpine, which is a very lightweight Linux OS base image, but I also wanted it with Node. So what you can do, if you go to Docker Hub, which is hub.docker.com, for instance, what you'll do here is find, you can search for loads of different images, or you can simply go to explore here. The idea is you can actually see there's what I was mentioning before, Docker CE. I think they call it Docker Desktop now, but what you're wanting to look for is the containers. So these are the base images, basically. So you can look down the list there. There's actually thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and you can see there's base images. So if I tick that, you've got things like Ubuntu, Debian, that you'll see down there. There are some Windows ones as well. Windows when you look down there. But right now, the one that I've been using is Alpine because it's a minimal Docker image based on a very small size. You can see there, look, 5 meg in size. But ultimately, that's just the base OS. Now, what I ended up doing is I actually wanted Node because I'm using Node.js. Okay, so I looked for, and again, you can have Node with Mongo already and things like that. I just wanted the base image, Linux Alpine in this case, with Node. Okay, so if I have a look there, you can see these are the official images as well. So you'll see that people have created their own, or there's some official ones. But either way, what I've actually done is get this image, and the way you get that image, I say there's a few ways to do this, but this is the easiest one. See there, it's saying copy and paste this to pull an image. That's it. You just need that command. But there is something called tags. Now tags are like versions, basically. So you can see there, if I click on tags, there's all sorts of versions here. Okay. More than I care to go through right now, but all I know is that I did the command line docker pull node. In fact, I'll go there at the moment. You see there, look, I've got a tag which is that. Okay, so it's 9.80-Alpine. So essentially what I ended up doing is docker pull node, then the format is actually a colon 9.80 dash alpine. Okay, whoops, if I can spell. Okay, what that did, if I pressed enter there, I won't because I've already got it, is sorry, I've just moved that out of the way. That would download, and as you can see there, look, it's not 5 meg, it's because it's got some extra bits and pieces, but this is the image, this one here, is the base image. So that is an OS, the Linux Alpine, with all the node bits and pieces and npm and a few of the bits and pieces on there. Okay, so that gave me my base image, and I can then create a container out of that. So there's commands where I can actually go and generate a container from that image. But I'm going to show you how I've used it in an application. So the first step really is to have got this image down, and as you see, I've got a few other images here. One is here's a Microsoft one, slightly larger in size, no less, but you can see there it's got the latest tag, and this was because I wanted to have a look at Microsoft SQL Server, whatever it is, 2017 I think, running on Linux. So and again, because I didn't want to spin up a VM with Linux on, install all that all myself, I'm running in Windows 10, but I can run a Linux container essentially as well. And incidentally, when you look under right mouse click of the Docker icon, you can see there at the moment I'm using containers for Linux or Linux, whichever way you say it. You can switch to Windows containers. You can have all the Windows orientated sort of containers for Docker, but as I say, at the moment I'm using the Linux ones, and sometimes it is a bit confusing. I forget which environment I'm in, and I think that I've lost all the images or containers, but I realize that I'm in the wrong environment, so I switch between Windows and Linux. So I'll just show you one final thing in this part before we actually get into how we use Docker itself, is I'll show you something called Kitematic. The first time you run this, it will prompt you to download it, and there's some instructions that you can follow, but essentially it's a visual interface to work a little bit with Docker. It doesn't give you everything, but it gives you at least a little bit of a visual to get started, which is sometimes easier when you just want to get your feel around and find out how this thing works. So the first thing it does is, this is really from Docker Hub. So what we looked at on the web there, all of these sort of images that I talked about, what it's doing, it's given us a display of some of the common ones. So you've got things like you will have base images as well, like Nginx, from the Linux world. There's Redis, there's things like Ubuntu, again MongoDB, so that's essentially got a Linux OS and all the Mongo stuff on there. MySQL, same sort of thing, Postgres, all that type of thing. So these are base container images so that you can actually get started. And incidentally, we can actually, yes, you can have everything in one container, but you can certainly have containers that can talk to each other. So that's where it starts getting interesting, because you can have obviously something like MySQL in one container, and if you do need to update that container, like the version or other bits and pieces, you can obviously just update that one container rather than the whole application and everything else. So this is where again, this interface just gives you again, I've got a couple of containers here. You can see that there's my Microsoft SQL Server running on Linux. It's not started, but I can start the container, stop it, restart it, ultimately delete it, go into some settings. It doesn't really matter. We'll go through about how to use this from the command line anyway, but it's just to show you that there is a visual interface to work with Docker as well. But But that's it for this video. The next video, what we're going to do is look how we can use, as I say, a Node.js application, but how we can actually hook that up to create the application within a container. And as I say, it means that we can then run that container locally. We can then deploy it to a server or a cloud hosting platform like Azure, and that's what we'll go through in the next video.